Welcome to our Bible study as we look at Genesis chapter 47. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, as we look into your word today, we ask that you would help us to deal with the themes that we struggle with, especially that of jealousy. And as we learn to see some important lessons on it, help us to grow in our maturity and in our faith. Amen. Time for me to scoot over and time for you to get out your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 47. Today we will be looking at verses 1 through 14. And as we jump into it, let's just start reading verses 1 through 4. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now, please, let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Going back up to verse 1, Joseph did as he said he would do. He went in and spoke to Pharaoh. He was completely transparent in what was going on, very honest and upfront. I think he knew that Pharaoh was the kind of ruler that usually kept tabs on what was happening. Nothing was to be gained by looking like they were trying to manipulate him. So Joseph did not do that. He was very honest. And he sort of started working in this other factor that not only did family members come up, or I should say come down from Canaan, but so did their flocks and herds. Pharaoh needed to know that this was an agricultural, or I should say a pastoral people. And the sooner Pharaoh knew that that's what he was dealing with, the better. So he makes that very clear. But he may have a second reason for this. Not only is he telling Pharaoh, my family comes from this underclass of shepherds, he's also letting Pharaoh get a gander at just how rich and successful his family is. When Pharaoh sees and hears reports of what the family brings with them, he might be impressed and realize that this family is not to be trifled with. They are substantial people, and they might be a real asset to Egypt. They are now in the land of Goshen, he says. So again, he didn't try to fool Pharaoh or make him think that they were waiting outside and expecting his permission. After all, Pharaoh would just find out later that he had been fooled, and that would do no one any good. We might call this kind of honesty calculated honesty, since there certainly is a motive behind it. And that might lead us to question, how sincere is it? If you're honest because you know that's the best way to go, that's what will get you the most, isn't that kind of, I don't know, I'm not sure how to put it. That just doesn't seem as pure or good. And yet, really, that's how we live our lives. In fact, one motto that I grew up with was that honesty is the best policy. It's the best way to live your life, and that's what Joseph is modeling right now. It never hurts to be honest. It may actually hurt at the beginning, but it always, in the long run, is the better way to go. He brings 5 in verse 2, 5 men or 5 brothers with him. Why 5? There's no explanation given, but some commentators will point out that 5 was a very special number to the Egyptians. I'm not sure why. But if that's the case, Joseph may have been playing to Pharaoh's superstitions. And throughout the narrative, this account in Genesis, we see that number 5 cropping up over and over again with reference to the Egyptians. And just as Joseph had predicted, Pharaoh's first question to these men is, "What is your occupation?" Now, last time I said this is just something you ask in the course of small talk. So what do you do for a living? And I think that's part of it. We might extend the understanding a little further as we see this formal meeting. Could it also be that Pharaoh was trying to figure out, if I'm inheriting these people, I want to know how to put them to the best use for me and for my kingdom. Someone comes into your country, wants to live there for a period of time. You want to know, can you support yourself? Can you be an asset to our culture? And that could very well be a part of what Pharaoh was also asking. And their answer in verse 4, they say, "We have come to sojourn in the land." We don't use that word sojourn very often anymore. We've brought it up in earlier parts of the study of Genesis, but not since this video Bible study's begun. The word sojourn means to dwell somewhere temporarily. You would sojourn in a hotel. You might stay there for a night, a couple nights, a couple weeks at the most. But this is not your permanent address. And this is how Joseph and his brothers, and certainly Jacob, felt about their being in Egypt. This is not our final stop. We're just here temporarily. And they wanted Pharaoh to know, we're not going to become permanent members of your society. You don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to plan for it. Where were they meant to be? What was their true home? If Egypt was just a place to sojourn? Well, you could have given one of two answers. You could have said Canaan. God had promised the land of Canaan to Abraham, and then to Isaac, and then to Jacob. And they still haven't taken possession of it. And all of Abraham's descendants, or at least Jacob and his descendants, viewed Canaan as their land proper, even though they did not yet possess it. They were not giving it up, even though they had to leave it for now. But you could have also said, no, the ultimate destination for God's people is heaven. And both of those answers would be right. Certainly for you and me, we are sojourners in this world. But I'm but a stranger here. Heaven is my home. If that's the case, and I think most Christians would agree that it is, why do we sometimes become so attached to this place where we sojourn? Why does the world become sometimes far too beautiful to us and far too precious? And why do we fall too much in love with life in this world if we know that we are really destined for something better? Well, only you can answer that for you. But we can go on and look at verses 5 and 6. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. Now, Pharaoh is being very shrewd here. He gives them exactly what they ask. But I get the idea, as Pharaoh looks these brothers over, that he's rather impressed, and certainly impressed with the family's success and the wealth that they have accumulated. And based on what he's seen, Pharaoh says, if you have any leftover brothers or relatives in that clan that are looking for work, I'd like them to be rulers of my cattle. And actually, let's see, how does he say that? Put them in charge of my livestock. That's a very loose translation. The literal translation from the Hebrew is, make them rulers of cattle over those that are mine. Now, that's a slightly different way of putting it. And that leaves us open to two different interpretations. Either let them rule over my cattle, and that's what this translation goes with, put them in charge of my livestock. But listen again to that literal phrase, make them rulers of cattle over those that are mine. You could also interpret that to be, make them managers of my cattle men. Well, now we know Pharaoh himself owns livestock. He just feels that it's kind of a dirty business and let lesser people take care of it. But he's apparently got a ranch out there and he's got livestock. And it could be that he's looking at Joseph's family and Jacob and his success, and he's saying, you guys really know how to do this. I'd like you to put a couple of your people over my people, become overseers. That way the Egyptian cattle herders are not displaced. They're not losing their jobs, but there's another layer of bureaucracy that Pharaoh is putting in. And maybe these Hebrews can teach them a trick or two in order to boost and benefit Pharaoh's profits. When someone puts you in charge of something that you were not expecting, you suddenly get called into the boss's office and they say, I'm putting you on a new project and you're in charge. Or I'm setting you over a department and you weren't planning for it. Do you meet news like that with excitement or with some anxiety? Or maybe a little of both? Every one of us deals with it differently. But we see here that certainly Joseph's family is making an impression on Pharaoh. Let's read on. Verses 6 through 10. The land of Egypt is before you. Oh, how generous of you, Pharaoh. We'll get back to that in a moment. He goes on to say, settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. We just saw that. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Now it's interesting in verse 6. In fact, we're kind of repeating. We saw 5 and 6, and now we're looking at 6 through 10. But as Pharaoh says, Egypt is before you. I had to pause and say, oh, how big of you, Pharaoh. And the fact is, Egypt's present blessings and wealth are all on account of Joseph. Joseph had saved them all from famine. So Pharaoh was really being generous with Joseph's gains and blessings. And I think Pharaoh was wise in recognizing that he shouldn't hold anything back. I think Pharaoh knew that this Joseph was a golden goose for him. And now all the brothers are being blessed because of this one brother, Joseph. In that regard, don't our minds go back to Christ? We are all blessed by what this one, born of a woman, born as a man, our brother, we are all blessed by what he has done and earned for us. We benefit from his sacrifice. Looking at verse 7, we learn that Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and I put a surprise face there, a sticker, because that's not the way it was normally done. Pharaoh was a supreme ruler and regarded as a deity. In fact, he was regarded by Egyptian culture and religion as being a god himself. He was the human embodiment of Ra, the Egyptian sun god. So for some decrepit, aged, old fellow from the desert to walk in and bestow a blessing on him was very backwards. And yet Pharaoh allowed it to happen. In fact, I think Pharaoh was a little bit taken aback and wasn't quite sure how to react at first when Jacob showed up, because this man was so old. And in those days, in those cultures, age was a sign of honor. But it was so obvious, so remarkable, that Pharaoh had to bring it up. How many are the days of the years of your life? Pharaoh just couldn't believe he was looking at someone that old who was still apparently vigorous enough to make this long journey. It's a strange way he asks it, but again, that might suggest the awkwardness of the words coming out of his mouth, or it might suggest an extreme formality and a stiffness that speaks of a sense of respect toward Jacob. And Jacob answers in the same way that he's asked. The days, how does he put it? Jacob said to Pharaoh in verse 9, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Now we would go, wow. And apparently Pharaoh would too. Maybe not everyone lived that old back in those days. Maybe that was just God's people. But then what does Jacob say? I know that's not much. These 130 years, they're few, and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Talk about modesty. Pharaoh thought Jacob was a spectacular example of longevity, but Jacob kind of saw his life as being a bit of a failure, at least compared to his father's. He also speaks of his sojournings. Jacob is not going to make Egypt his home. And that can be a real assurance given to Pharaoh. We have no intentions of taking over. He speaks of his days as being few. I don't think he's just messing with Pharaoh. He might be looking back to his father and grandfather. His father Jacob lived to be 180. His grandfather Abraham lived to be 175. Jacob knows that he's 130 and he's pretty much at the end of his life. He's not going to make it as long as his father and grandfather did. And he says, my days have been evil, because compared to those who came before him, Jacob had pulled a lot of stunts in his life, and he had spent all of his older years really paying for them. His life, his choices he made when he was younger might have guaranteed him riches and success in this world, but they had cost him dearly. And perhaps the greatest was living all those years thinking that his favorite son Joseph was dead. And focus on that word favorite, because that's a theme we're going to be seeing sort of dealt with in this chapter as we go further into it. And then in verse 10, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. It's kind of a turning around. You would expect the king of a great state, a dignitary, to bestow blessings on this peon, this person who's not even a legal citizen. But it's the other way around. That blessing probably was a blessing of thanksgiving to God for all the good that Pharaoh had done for the family, and to bestow the promise of long life and prosperity. Was Jacob's life, as he looks back on it, as we look back on it, was his life a success or a failure? It kind of depends, I suppose, on how you look at it. But it could be a question we ask of ourselves as you look back on your life. Has it been a success or a failure? Now, the correct answer is, I'm not done living my life yet. I'll give you the answer a little bit later. Let's look at verses 11 to 12. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. I underlined a couple words in verse 12 because this is Joseph, the one who had always been the favorite of his father. And now, more recently, he had bestowed favoritism on Benjamin. One of these dark underlying themes running through this whole account has been, the jealousy that arises when favoritism is shown. But now, what is favoritism? It's when you deal with people on unequal terms. But now we see Joseph dealing with these families on unequal terms, giving or providing for his father and to his brothers and all of the household the amount of food that was necessary for each family. And that meant being unequal, and yet that was the epitome of being fair. As we wind things up, now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Now there was no food. We're actually entering into the third year of the famine. The first 2 years, a lot of local people in that area would have used up their own reserves, may have only made 1 or 2 trips to Egypt, but now hunger was setting in earnest. We learned that the land of Canaan languished. They fainted with hunger. Things were getting desperate. Now people had no choice, and they were coming in droves to give whatever they had to get grain back. Egypt, thanks to Joseph's preparation, was becoming very rich. When we continue, next time, we'll see where that takes us. For now, let's close with a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you take care of us, and so often when we think life has been unfair, you are simply setting us up for something far greater. Remind us that we are only sojourners in this land, and what we see here is not a reflection of our ultimate reward, but simply something that passes. Keep our eyes ever set on our true destiny when we stand before you. Amen. See you next time.